What is the strangest mystery that is still unsolved? The suicide of Ellen Greenberg. 27 stab wounds in different areas of the body. Suicide stabbings are so ridiculous. There's a case from Denmark in 2003 where a woman was found dead by her husband, who called the police and said she had killed herself. She was on the bedroom floor next to a broken lamp. Her wristwatch was torn off and her panties pulled down, and she had 179 stab wounds. Because it was a Sunday, they had to call in a criminal assistant on his off day, and he deemed it a suicide because she had a history of depression. The whereabouts of the last Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller. The last verified sighting of him was in Berlin roughly 3 days before it fell. He had stated he knew full well what the Russians did to prisoners and he had no intentions of being captured. As chief of the Gestapo, he more than likely had access to foreign documents as well as ways to replicate them. Both the CIA and the KGB spent time looking for him, but no trace has ever been found. He probably went to Argentina like the rest of the Nazis. I briefly dated a Brazilian girl that was very German looking. Turns out her dad's side was German and fled to Brazil. Her grandfather was part of the SS. South America, probably. That was the Nazi failsafe. Disappear and blend into the country. They think they found a chain of forts in Venezuela used by Nazi officials. Fun fact, that's where many Confederates went after losing the war. Fled to Brazil where they had their own town. Which of the 3 astronauts aboard Apollo 10 was responsible for the floating turd? Who pooped the bunk? An unknown group of people broke into an FBI building, and no one has found out who they are. But the best part of the story is, they did it by leaving a sticky note that said "Do not lock the door tonight," and it worked. Imagine being the guy who left it unlocked. I think that would be everyone that day. Last one out was the most rotten egg, though. Who was Perseus? From 1943 to 1946, the Soviet Union had a higher-level spy in the Manhattan Project. Codenamed Perseus, this spy was a scientist at the White Sands missile testing site in NM, and the main research facilities in Los Alamos. Perseus saw pretty much the entire project start to finish, giving the Russians everything they needed to get to work on their own bomb. The fact that they were able to do so within 4 years of the end of World War II when their nations were still devastated is proof positive that Perseus helped a great deal. And to top it all off, Perseus was never caught or positively identified. That we know of. I don't think the US government would be keen to share the name of the person that sold out all their advancements to Russia. That's right. It could be embarrassing. Or the US could have assassinated him. Or the US could have turned him and work as a double agent. There are lots of different, but valid reasons why officials may not release Perseus's identity. Not to mention that this was decades ago and the very people who organized whatever happened may have destroyed enough records to cover this up permanently. There's a chance that despite US officials knowing who Perseus was back then, they may have covered it up so well that US officials today don't know who Perseus was. It's all very fascinating. There's also the chance that US officials simply never found out, because Perseus was such a damn pro. Asher degree. Girl leaves her house in the middle of the night during a storm and disappeared. The only problem is that she was terrified of thunder and lightning and had no motive for leaving, because her home life was fine. Then her clothes and backpack were found a year later in an abandoned construction site. Is this the girl wearing all white that they think is buried in a parking lot? No, she ran away during the early hours of the morning during a massive storm. She was spotted on the side of the highway, but ran into the woods when anyone stopped. She had apparently packed a bag with some clothes and books which was found buried miles away from her home. She seems to have spent some time in an old shed, evidenced by candy wrappers. Fascinating case and one that keeps me up at night. Why would drive a little girl to take off from a loving home into the night and the wind and rain in February? Was she meeting someone? Was she groomed? Unfortunately, the case did not generate much popular interest at the time. This case is so strange to me. Did you see the photo of the little girl they released that was found with the candy wrappers? They think she had it in her backpack, but don't know why. So many strange details to that case. There are a few that bug me. The Sodder children. Their house burned down in the middle of the night. Several of the kids were presumed dead, but their bodies were never found in the debris and it never burned hot enough to cremate them. It started to look extremely suspicious and the parents until their deaths believed that they had been taken for some reason. Many years down the line they did receive a photo and cryptic note from someone claiming to be their son, but it was never authenticated. The boy in the box. A deceased little boy, found beaten, recently shaved off his hair and abandoned in the box for a bassinet that he was way too old for. The photos and reconstructions of him released to the public in the desperate hope of identifying him are haunting. The St. Louis Jane Doe, a little girl found in an abandoned house, decapitated and bound at the hands. They have no dental records or facial reconstruction to go from. The case has led nowhere. She's just nameless, lost to time. Tree State Crematory. A devastating case of a man called back from his college football career to take over his father's business when the father fell ill. Over time people started noticing bodies and body parts on the grounds, just hanging around. When someone finally took the reports seriously they found that he'd been piling bodies up randomly all over the property, often when it would have been much easier to cremate them, instead of hauling them around to where they were dumped. The guy gave families canisters of cement dust instead of ashes. The mystery on this one is why. The guy never gave up the answer to what happened there and will only insist that there are no answers. His lawyer theorized he had mercury poisoning from cremating amalgam fillings, but that doesn't really explain why you would dump a body instead of cremating it when the latter takes less effort. The West Memphis 3 case. All of the satanic panic mess obscured so much that will probably go unanswered now. A bloody man covered in mud stumbled into a Bojangles the night those little boys went missing. Cops barely investigated that incident and lost the blood evidence they did collect regarding it. What was going on with John Mark Byers and Terry Hobbs, two dads of two of those kids, both turning up with evidence and acting at different points like they may have been involved? Where the ever-living crap are all the severed human feet coming from? Lars Mittank, a German tourist on vacation in Bulgaria. He got into a fight and the medical complications kept him from going home on a flight with his friends. Staying behind. It looks like his mental state unraveled completely over the course of a few days, increasing paranoia eventually culminating in his complete disappearance into a field of sunflowers. I believe there's a decent amount of evidence that drowning victims who were wearing shoes end up separated from their feet via natural processes. The foot, encased in the shoe, was shielded from the predators and microorganisms that would have been acting on the rest of the body. Yet, any tendons and whatever decompose quicker inside shoes, making the joints detach, and with water making the skin an essential splodge. That's how you get shoe feet. About the mercury poisoning at the Tree State Crematory, it is very possible that it caused him to dump the bodies regardless of reason. Mercury poisoning causes irrational thought and action. The term Mad Hatter was coined after men hat makers went insane after working with mercury. What on earth happened to the Trump family? So it's this Australian family who owned a berry farm. Somehow Mr. and Mrs. Trump and their 3 grown kids developed the belief that they weren't safe and they needed to flee their farm without cell phones or anything traceable, credit cards, etc. It sounds like the oldest son wasn't sold on whatever it was that led them to flee. He brought his phone, but eventually it got tossed from the car. He ended up bailing first and taking a train home. From there the rest of the family slowly separated and suffered various degrees of emotional breaks. The 2 girls stole the car. Somehow they got separated and one made it home, but the other was found on the floor in the backseat of some guy's car in a catatonic state. He spotted her after he started down the road. Eventually the parents were found wandering around aimlessly. Fortunately they were all okay physically, but what the frick happened? Was someone actually after them? Were they delusional? As far as I know the family hasn't released any updates. Just read about this through the article you shared. How have all those involved, the family, police, medical professionals, remained so mum on what happened? I get the impression they really don't understand themselves. I don't know what the legitimacy of folie à cute is, but it seems reasonable that they all got wrapped up in the paranoia. Like if someone is creeped out, and then you get creeped out too. And then all this stuff happens really fast and after you're just like wait, what the frick? I'd bet money it was the laundry machine. Hear me out. When I was a kid, I was in my basement one day playing with toys or on the Wii or something. My slightly younger sister's best friend was also there. We started talking. Then I suddenly got the feeling that I was being watched, and that whatever was watching was really, really bad. It was like the most intense feeling of paranoia ever. I'd never felt that way before, and to add to the strangeness, it was bright out. Our basement was most comforting part of the house, and there were even windows so I could see the sun from where I was standing. So it wasn't just out of fear of the dark or unknown. The only sounds I could hear other than us were those of the washer and dryer in our basement, but they'd stopped making noise just a little bit ago. But this super intense paranoia came on, and even at around 8 or 9 years old I knew it was unfounded and not normal. That was probably just imagining it. So to confirm that it was just my imagination, I turned to my sister's best friend who was standing next to me looking around the room, and I asked, do you get the feeling that something really bad is about to happen? And she surprisingly said actually, yes. Do you think we should run? Yeah. And we both sprinted upstairs, and then the feeling was gone. Neither of us could explain what happened, but we both knew there was something weird in that moment. Out of morbid curiosity we both went back down a few minutes later and everything was fine. It took until about 2 years ago, on Reddit, ironically, for me to understand what happened. Apparently, some washing machines, especially older ones, can occasionally make very loud sounds at frequencies just at the edge human range of hearing. Your brain interprets that weirdly as something is happening a lot, but I don't know what it is and it causes extreme paranoia when you hear it. So overall a very innocent answer to what was probably the creepiest feeling ever. Do you have a link to more about this? It sounds fascinating. Not the person you asked, but I thought I'd mention that it's called infrasound. Unfortunately I don't have any specific links to share,